Webinar started today where we're going to be discussing the new age of monitoring threats, both from a domestic and in advance of travel. As indicated, we'll go through a number of items that we'll want to touch upon today. There'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions at the conclusion of the webinar. We'll leave the last 15 minutes or so available for questions. Some of the things that we're going to want to look at today is how you as an organization, you or your organization, can monitor threats, and quite honestly, the lack of monitoring that can be done, what impact that'll have on an organization. Does it affect you at all? And some of the topics that we'll want to cover, and we will cover today, will be why threats should be monitored and the impact, the methodology and the methods and tools for gathering data that you'd be looking at, understanding that data once you've looked at it, and understanding the open source network that information would be coming from, how to identify those threats, what is credible, what is not credible as far as the information that you find, any specific threats and that you come across, and how to monitor relative to travel and executives travel, as well as individuals that might be traveling in your sales department or anyone else that might be traveling to operations that you have outside the United States. How you'd be able to use geofencing as a result of monitoring any of those threats. The nuances that would be there as far as monitoring specific senior executives, if that's your focus. Any differences between domestic threats and those abroad, which we'll talk about as it relates to the threats that you might see domestically will differ greatly than those that may be seen abroad as a result of cultural differences, things of that nature that Adrian will get into. And then the intelligence sources that are out there and available for you in advance of travel. So one of the things that we want to talk about is why should we even worry about threats, and why should they be monitored? Well, as most of all of you are probably aware, there's been a lot of news about the monitoring of social media activity, primarily on the governmental side. And with the recent expiration of the Patriot Act, which had some protection in there as it related to monitoring what can be monitored. Monitoring from a governmental standpoint must change as a result of the expiration of that act. How that plays out will be determined in the months to come, but there is currently limited knowledge of the role of technology and computer mediated communications, such as Facebook and Twitter, in dissemination of messages and how it might promote extremist agendas and violence. And obviously that's a big concern for individuals as well as organizations as it relates to the extremist groups that are out there now, the potential impact on brand, things of that nature. So with that, the Supreme Court had a recent ruling actually just this past month that in fact they've changed the rules as far as what's considered a threat on social media. So within that, then you as an organization and within your role within an organization, whatever that may be, whether that's a security focused role or a human resources role, you have to understand exactly what will be monitored on a regular basis, and then what you need to do above and beyond to help protect your personnel and or your assets of the organization as well as your overall brand. So that focus has really been narrowed, so the onus is really pushed out on the organizations and the individuals who have a responsibility for doing that. So when we talk about why threats should be monitored, it's a good idea to kind of understand the digital landscape that's out there. You'll see to the right on the screen that you're looking at that those traditional social media items and outlets that are there, as far as Facebook, YouTube, Google, Twitter, Instagram, Tumblr, Pinterest, and then LinkedIn, because many more, I should say, organizations and individuals within organizations are using LinkedIn, and really it's kind of the Facebook for business and focused individuals. So there's a lot more that's going to be shared within LinkedIn. So these are some of those areas that you need to be concerned about and what you're looking at. So right now, 1 in 9 people are members of Facebook. Twitter, just to give you an idea of the landscape that's out there, adds 500,000 users every day. So there are people constantly getting into that environment and joining the Twitter world. 48 hours of video is uploaded to YouTube every minute. And then there's 15+ million members on LinkedIn. It goes back to what I was talking about, that growing concentration on businesses and individuals wanting to get involved in LinkedIn and be able to share information. And then over 3,000 pictures are added to Flickr every minute. So based upon kind of understanding this digital landscape, you can get a sense of how much activity is out there and how much information is there to be gained by individuals and corporations to help understand exactly what threats might be out there against those individuals or the organizations as a whole. So some things about why threats should be monitored as well. You want to be able to come up with an idea of how relationships are developed and relationships that you can see within the social media footprint and what threats might be there. Unfortunately, this isn't a very easy way to disseminate information when you're looking at and trying to establish the credibility of threats that are out there in the social media environment. There are so many, as you saw, that it takes a lot of pieces to bring together to get a good look at the overall puzzle. So you want to look at relationship mapping and how it works. You need confirmation of accounts that exist out there that on those in that open source network that you're looking for. You want to be able to gather any photos or videos that might be posted and bring them in together and provide timelines and verify locations. There's a lot of software and, quite honestly, applications that are out there that help track locations. So you're able to verify locations based upon information that's put out there. You want to uncover any memberships or associations or affiliations with groups that might be there, and identifying potential witnesses, location of subjects, confirmation of addresses. And as you can see, it's not a very clear picture if you're just looking at one of those items. You really have to use it and approach it from an investigative standpoint and say, I need to gather all this information, pull it together so I can get a clear understanding of the threat that might be there for either our organization or individuals within our organization. So when you look at it from the standpoint of the methods and the tools, there's a tremendous amount of information out there. There's also a tremendous amount of ways that you can gather that information. Some of those tools that are out there are free tools that you can sign up for. Others are paid subscriptions that you may be able to belong to. And there's a significant difference between those two and the information that you're able to gather. Some of the free tools that are out there may not give you all or dive as deep as some of the paid tools that are available. And you need to understand exactly kind of what is the social media footprint. And to understand that social media footprint, you really have to look at the tools to establish the extent of that footprint for an individual that you might be monitoring or a group that you might be monitoring. Their social media profile, which is kind of that snapshot in time for them, is, okay, how active are they? And then if they're very active, then you may want to say, okay, I'm going to have to watch this group or this individual over a period of time to get an idea of what the overall potential threat may be. And then you want to look at all those social media channels that are out there, the Twitter, the Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Flickr, all those ones that you saw in the previous slide that were listed there, and understand exactly how deep you want to get. So a social media search, many people think they'll do a Google search and they'll pull back information or that's out there that might be listed on an individual. Well, you need to go deeper than that. That's a very, very surface level kind of a search. And you want to use these tools that are out there to dig deeper and go to a deep web harvesting and actually delve under the waters and understand exactly what might be there. That'll allow you to capture all the aliases that are out there, any handles that people use, any other online identities or avatars that individuals have that you might be able to pull together as part of your investigations and your ability to determine if in fact there are credible threats there. You want to look at it from a customizable keyword search. So if you're looking at, you're concerned about domestic travel, or you're concerned about Domestically, the brand of your organization, you're going to look for different things as it relates to keywords that you're going to hone in on, versus if you're looking at overseas travel, or you want to make sure what the cultural or the religious or the political activity is as it relates to that. So you want to really customize that keyword search when you're looking and trying to identify threats that are out there in the social media world. And then you may end up having to look at multilingual issues because of the overseas travel and the area that your employees might be traveling to. So it may be a situation where you have multilingual and have the capabilities and the resources internally to look at those items that might be coming back in a different language. So when you look at those social media tools, here's an example of a social media tool that we use, as far as just to give you an example of some research that may come back in some reports. You want to use a tool that establishes the extent of that individual social media profile. Again, that snapshot in time we just talked about. It allows you to capture those aliases, those handles. And as you can see, you're able to drill down and find keyword searches, and you're going to be able to pull from any of those posts that were there. So the flag terms that you see in that example report would actually pull you back to exactly where that came from and those terms that you were looking for, how many occurrences they had. So this is kind of just an example to give you an understanding of what you might be able to find using a search tool as it relates to the social media searches and the information that you get back. Again, not a one-stop answer for everything. It's part of an overall comprehensive look and program, but we just kind of wanted to give you an idea of what a report may look like or come back with, or what you'd want to look for. And again, this is one that we use internally and we have our customers use, which we'll talk a little bit about towards the end of the webinar as well. So I mentioned not long ago the terminology open source network. So what is the open source network? Open source intelligence is collected from publicly available resources or sources. So those channels that I talked about before, as far as LinkedIn and Twitter and Flickr, those are all part of the open source intelligence network. Anyone can gain access to those if they understand how to search it and look for it properly. The term open refers to exactly that. It's overt. It's publicly available resources as opposed to a covert or clandestine resource. It's open to the public. As long as you know how to get to it and research it, you'll be able to find it. The open source network is drawn from publicly available material, the internet, any social media, traditional mass media, that would be television, radio, newspapers, magazines, blogs, anything that's posted out there. So anything that you've ever said to any colleague or anybody's ever said to you about, be concerned about what's posted out on the internet, because it's always there, it's there forever. This is the environment that we're talking about, that open source network where you can gain access to that through any of those internet sources, social media sources, or a traditional media outlet like television, radio, newspaper. The open source network has always been an important part of an analysis, but continuing advances in information technology has really expanded and given a voice to even larger numbers of people and made it possible to obtain information that was previously unavailable to people. So as technology continues to advance, it allows a broader spectrum of individuals to go out on the open source network and be able to find and gather information, which obviously has pros and cons to it. But from the prospect of being able to identify threats and credible threats that might be out there to an organization, it's made it an extremely viable option for organizations to be able to track that information. Many of you may have internal resources that are dedicated to this now. So as an example of that, they can tell, open sources can tell us how various groups, both domestically and overseas, react to news and press releases. So a press release or a news release comes out from CNN on a company, you can actually almost instantaneously be able to tell kind of the reaction that comes from that as a result of the expansion of and the ability to gather that information through the open source network. There's no reason to guess anymore or settle for the kind of the official view. You can get that information and disseminate it yourself and draw your own conclusions and be able to make proactive choices as a result of being able to get that information. And you can assess various groups' perceptions on how well, as well as track trends over time. You can use it for new product launches, be able to understand exactly what the trend is, how people are viewing things. So there's a lot of different information that can be used on the open source network outside of the threats that we were talking about that has expanded as a result of technology advances. The social media networking, is a powerful tool for social connection and real-time information. As I mentioned, I'll touch a little bit about some organizing activity that has occurred as a result of that real-time information and how that can be shared and disseminated, both internally and externally, how you're able to identify a threat within an organization from outside the walls of your organization. It's heavily used by subversive groups, organized crimes, and radicals that want to transmit information to a lot of different people at a very quick rate and spreading out over a lot of different directions. So it's an easy way to send a message and get it to a lot of people very quickly. It's also easy to monitor using low-level means, but very hard to derive actionable intelligence due to the enormous amount of unstructured data. I talked to you about all those different channels that were out there and how it's not an easy one-stop report that you would be able to go out. You have to take that unstructured data and bring it together and use the tools that are there that allows you to bring all those pieces of that puzzle together and give you a clear picture of that. Unfortunately, it does take some efforts and some time to do that, but it's well worth the effort based upon the information that's there and the actionable items that you can actually derive out of all that amount of data that you're able to receive. So kind of understanding that threat identification and that process. This slide shows you a little bit of the process design and how that works in relationship to the overall information that's out there. So when you look at that, you have kind of the overreaching internet piece of it, where all that information and data is stored that you can get access to. And the next piece is using all those tools that you have, whether they're free subscriptions, whether they're paid subscriptions, whether you outsource it to someone, whether you do it internally. You need to gather all that information from the internet, harvest it together. So that's that piece of bringing them all together to get a clear picture of what's going on. You can enrich that information, meaning how does it apply to you? How, in fact, can you then take out that noise, for lack of a better term, that isn't really credible as it relates to a threat, and then analyze it, and then be able to make some actionable item come out the other side of that. Whether that's increased security, whether that's limit travel, whether that's understanding a press release may be required from your communications department, whatever that action may be, from that analyzation, you're able to take that information and truly come up with a proactive plan and strategy to get out in front of that if you need to. So we talked a little bit about, obviously the social media out there and the focus on Twitter. I'll use that as kind of the example because that is probably one of the most frequently used applications that are there. There's a term out there that's referred to as kind of the Twitter revolution, which refers to different revolutions and protests, all which are coordinating using social networking, and specifically the Twitter site, to plan protests, mobilize demonstrations, updates, news, and around the world. So again, I mentioned earlier how quickly that can happen. Everybody knows the instantaneous messaging that can be done with Twitter. You follow people all the time. People follow you. They see your activity. It's immediate. It's quick, and it can actually bring people together very quickly and bring them and unify them, quite honestly, to a cause and to an action or a demonstration that may be going on, or at least you could understand and look at that Twitter activity and be able to see and put pieces together showing that it's leading to some type of action. And it's not just limited to domestic or within the U.S. Obviously, that's something that you're going to be able to see from around the world. So again, you're exposed and you can garner a tremendous amount of information globally as a result of following that and kind of understanding the impact of that social media, and then this specific instance, Twitter specifically. So an example of what I'm talking about. A Twitter revolution that occurred back in 2011 in Egypt, an operational movement against the ruling government was active in various platforms on social media. Hashtags were created so that people could follow that and get to information very quickly by just following that hashtag. And they mobilized protesters on Twitter to join a demonstration back in January of 11. And that post and that protest drew a crowd of 80,000 people in the streets of Cairo in one day. So it's a tremendous vehicle to get a group of individuals together, get them socialized as it relates to the objective of that group, and then mobilize and actually demonstrate there. So it can be done very quickly and very efficiently. And as an organization, you have to be prepared for that. You have to be ready to deal with that. Well, our initiative today here is to give you an idea of what's out there so that you can use those same tools that may be used against you to help you develop a plan and move forward and be able to identify threats that are out there, so that you understand and you can use those same platforms that are being used against you as a tool to counteract those activities.
Okay, thanks, Joe, for that excellent introduction, and good afternoon to everybody on the webinar. So to start off with, we receive a lot of requests here at AFIMAC with clients and organizations that are looking to identify threats to their operations and their personnel and employees, not only domestically, but also abroad in all throughout the world, pretty much. One of the keys here is basically identifying how these threats are going to affect your particular organization, or whether or not that threat is a threat for your organization. And you can really either do this on your own by identifying the various groups and threats that I've highlighted here, or you can obviously engage the help of either a consultant or product or platform that's available. Some of the highlights here that we've found as we work with clients is starting with terrorism. And terrorism can obviously come and affect the organization from different avenues, depending on the part of the world. So in some parts of the world, the narco-terrorism is very prevalent. You talk about countries such as Mexico or Colombia or Venezuela. Basically, the large threat there is going to come from these cartels and other transnational criminal organizations, as they're called. There are some countries, obviously, where the religious views of different groups or individuals is more precedent. You talk about the Middle East with ISIS and other extremists who are very ingrained with martyrdom and suicide terrorism. Those types of groups are going to play a general, or they're going to present a general risk to organizations operating in that part of the world. You talk about ideological goals, companies or groups, I should say, excuse me, with ideological perspectives and visions. You talk about the abortion groups, for example, here in the United States, that sometimes protest or cause issues for organizations in the medical industry, for example. And you also talk about groups looking for solely economic gain, groups such as in organized crime or perhaps the mafia. And they utilize, for example, extortion to really carry out their goals. And extortion in Latin America particularly has really expanded and really blown up in the past couple of years as groups move from kidnapping and other sources of income to extortion, which is generally presents a less risk of apprehension or prosecution for these organizations. There's also groups with political motives. You talk about groups such as Occupy here in the U.S., Sovereign Citizens, Latin America, the FARC or the PCC in Brazil, the Hezbollah and Hamas in the Middle East. And those are groups that may or may not present a risk or a threat to your particular organization. For environmental concerns, I mean, there's groups that, we're all aware of PETA or, these other groups such as the Earth Liberation Front or the Animal Liberation Front, Greenpeace, that obviously have a wide footprint. So which groups they are targeting, whether it be manufacturing or farming, and pretty much any organization in the world is at risk. There's other groups that are less known, groups that are interested solely in the global media spotlight, which is basically something that applies to all groups and all organizations that may present a threat to a company. They're basically looking to get their word out. They're looking for some spotlight, their 5 minutes of fame, per se, in order to not only help their cause or help grow knowledge of their cause, but also grow their base and recruit additional individuals, to their organization. And as I'll mention here in a couple of minutes, there's also disgruntled employees. Workplace violence is unfortunately something that's been in the limelight in the past couple of years, particularly here in the U.S. And social media has really been a tool that organizations are using to try to combat that. So I have a slide here. Joe spoke briefly about Twitter and basically how much it's utilized. This is a map of all the geotagged tweets since 2009. And there's basically billions of them presented here in the U.S. There's maps. Twitter puts out visualization maps, for the entire world, and this one in particular is of the U.S. The interesting part about that is when you look at the world from the global scale, there's actually, you can see the sea routes where a lot of these sailors are actually on ships, and you can actually trace the world trade maps throughout the world. But as an introduction to geofencing, to briefly touch on the term geotagging, it's basically the term for adding geographical identification metadata to various media, and these may include photographs, videos, websites, and SMS messages. If you break it down by region, for example, in the Americas, the U.S. constitutes 50% of all tweets, Brazil 36%, Europe has the UK in the lead with 30%, Spain with 15%, much more of a breakdown there in Europe with additional countries taking the rest of that. In Asia, Indonesia has 44% of tweets. Obviously, China has severe restrictions on Twitter in the countries, and Japan is 13% of that in second place. And then in Africa, South Africa with 36% and Nigeria at 22%. So to talk a little bit about geofencing, it's basically a social media tool that a lot of organizations are utilizing now to identify those threats that I previously spoke about, and then create action plans or prepare contingency plans on how to mitigate those risks. Basically, you're going to search any social media traffic on all of the big 9 that Joe mentioned, and you're going to set a geographic search parameter. You're going to identify either a circle or a perimeter around a site. A lot of the tools that are available now actually allow you to customize that, and you can change it from a circle to a polygon to whatever you like. So traditionally, if you had, let's say, an office, now you can kind of change that geofence and include maybe a parking area to the side or some other area that you're interested in. And you're also able to set date and time parameters. So if you're only interested in activity around a particular geofence, for example, at night, where you're trying to identify whether there's any extracurricular activity or some other threat that is only present at night, you can do so. The tools available now are very, very customizable, and most of them will allow you to isolate a social media user. So for example, once you have identified a particular social media user that you're interested in maybe pulling a historical or preparing a profile for them, as Joe also mentioned, you're able to do so by their particular Twitter handle or Facebook profile. And you can utilize that information to prepare some analytics, plot their individual user traffic, identify, are they a heavy social media user, are they only posting on Facebook, not on Twitter, that sort of report preparation. And you can save these searches for future use, so you don't have to create these searches every single time. So for example, if you have a particular parameter that you utilize to search for, you can save it and basically reutilize it for any other location or any other social media user that you are interested in. One of the things that is important as you use these tools and maybe identify a provider or a tool that you want to engage in is utilize a tool that provides a link analysis matrix or possibly a web visualization. And what I mean by that is a lot of times these social media users, we've learned through our investigations, they may not post specific information that will create an alert based on those keywords, but they may, for example, like a post provided by another individual, or they may retweet something. And so there's some tools out there, not all of them, are able to basically create a matrix of that information and identify who that person is interacting with or who that person is following. If you take the example of the recent Charleston shooting in South Carolina, you may have an individual, whether it be an employee or a particular social media user that you're following, who is not posting information themselves. They may not be saying, that was a great event, should have killed more of them, but they may be, for example, retweeting something that a white supremacist group or one of the individuals in some of these racist organizations may be posting, and they may either be retweeting it or quote-unquote liking that post, and that's obviously relevant information for our needs in security as we prepare a profile for that individual. So there's some examples on how you can utilize social media to mitigate threats, and these are just a few. You use an example of, let's say, keywords, and Joe touched on that in one of his slides on the example given where it showed the family relationships of that individual. But as you build these tools and you create these investigative processes, you may use keywords such as homicide, kill, bomb, threat, the list goes on and on. There may be thousands or tens of thousands of keywords utilized. And a company may use this social media monitoring, for example, to identify OSHA violations. They may utilize it to investigate workplace injuries or monitor protest activity if there is a unionized workforce and the country laws allow it. The company may use also the intelligence gathered in order to monitor and possibly mitigate the risk, especially related to major strike and protest initiatives, as I mentioned. There's also a couple applications related to brand protection, whereby a retailer may use social media by monitoring the accounts of, for example, known counterfeiting individuals or companies, and monitor their social media for new products releases, which are designed and manufactured in their own product's likeness. We've seen a lot of interest in sports organizations who are obviously responsible for large events, and usually these organizations are utilizing a geofence around the venue or stadium and monitoring for certain keywords, and it depends on what particular risks are present there, but they may include fighting, accident, drunk, or even bomb. In the realm of executive protection, a security team may utilize their senior executives' names as keywords and search for any post directly naming those individuals. So in that case, you're able to identify a radical or a disgruntled employee who is naming a senior executive as a possible target. And in addition, the geofencing can be established around the offices, and monitoring of inappropriate photographs can be immediately identified. And we had an incident whereby we had an employee who was making his way into the office of a senior executive and posting pictures at their desk and other confidential information. And the security director was able to identify that by basically monitoring the social media coming out of that particular office. And I believe the user was using Instagram in that case. And lastly, in terms of workplace violence, a company can utilize social media with a disgruntled ex-employee who has been terminated and has made threatening remarks towards another employee or senior executive, whereby they can be monitored at their home, and any death threats or any direct threats can be acted upon when posted to any of these social media platforms. In terms of nuances of monitoring specific senior executives, I briefly touched upon it on the previous slide, whereby an organization may want to utilize that individual's name, for example, in social media or other news aggregation. But there's a couple other catalysts that particularly should be looked at when identifying these threats. And for example, we mentioned here the company activity is going to have a large effect on what kind of threats that particular security representative is going to have to deal with. Obviously, companies in, for example, oil or mining, which are involved in environmental issues, they're going to be more targeted by, for example, Greenpeace and PETA and some of the other organizations I previously mentioned. Companies in the pharmaceutical, for example, may be targeted by other groups. There's obviously a movement now in the U.S. for anti-vaccination. So all of those company activities are going to have an effect, and it's going to depend on what country the company's activities are located in. In terms of executive and employee activities, what groups are they members of, whether it be nonprofit or other NGOs, contributions that they've made, perhaps political affiliations, their relationships and partnerships of the company with other companies. So perhaps you, as a company, don't have a particular spotlight on you from an organization, but perhaps you are involved in a partnership with another company whose activities may be placing them and yourself at a little bit more risk. Obviously, the country affiliation is going to have a big role in that. As we always say, you know, the McDonald's establishments are pretty much the liaisons or representatives of the U.S. So anytime you see a country not happy with something the U.S. is doing, see in the news they burn down the McDonald's or break the windows and that sort of thing. So the country affiliation that the particular organization is headquartered in may present a risk for that company. Perceived wealth of the company and executive obviously are going to have an effect on the risk for those organizations solely interested in a monetary gain. Mention political affiliations, and then obviously another consideration you want to have is for any acquisitions, mergers, or joint ventures that your organization is currently interested in or speaking about, as those may have an effect on those on the risks. A couple of differences between domestic threats and those abroad. Many times, particularly for us in either the U.S. or Canada, we're very good about the risk present in our home country. Sometimes there's an issue in terms of perception or knowledge of what those threats are in other countries. And we prepared a list here of items that should be considered as you go ahead and prepare the listing of threats that you're going to be preparing for. Starting with the levels of crime, obviously statistics are meant to be changed to whatever you want to reflect, but it's important to be knowledgeable of the different levels of crimes within the countries in which you're operating in, not only looking at per se homicides, but kidnapping levels, extortion levels, some of the other statistics that you can look at to better prepare those mitigation plans. And also considering the impunity of criminals. In many of these countries, there basically is no rule of law, and in those cases or in those countries, there's much more of a risk of something occurring than, say, for example, here in the U.S., where an individual may consider prosecution or apprehension before committing a crime. In many countries, it basically does not occur. You take countries like Venezuela or Mexico, where less than maybe 5 or 10% of crimes are actually even investigated, maybe less than 2 or 3% of crimes lead to conviction. There is no rule of law. And again, speaking about terrorism, we've all been affected by terrorism now. The reality is terrorism affects citizens in some of these countries much more. There is much more activity by these groups, and that should be a concern. Spoke about kidnapping prevalence, which may be a threat to an organization, or always is. And the freedom of the press. I mean, how much of the information is actually getting out of the country? Is the government manipulating that information? Is the information accurate? And the next slide, or I have a slide here, which we'll be discussing some open source sources that you can consider in order to mitigate that. Every organization is different. You're going to want to consider what resources do you have available in order to respond to those threats, both internal and external. So whether or not you have an internal resource consisting of maybe a regional security manager or local security staff that can help guide and provide intelligence, or you're going to rely on the government or the local police to help respond. And lastly, speaking about intelligence, obviously the focus there should be on preventing any issues and facilitating a response. So a couple intelligence sources here in advance of travel. I basically listed many of the government sources that we utilize, which are open source. Most here on the call, I assume, would utilize the U.S. State Department and obviously the OSAC reporting. We have found the UK information to also be important and relevant. There is also a Canadian website that you can utilize. and for statistics and other information on countries in order to help you prepare your risk matrices and criticalities, there is a United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime website which provides information on other things that I've mentioned, such as the homicide rate, kidnapping rate, that sort of thing on each country. There's also other tools that you can utilize. There's other tools in threat intelligence platforms in terms of data aggregation or news articles. There's social media investigative products, which we will touch on here in a second. And there's also resources for threat mapping and creating heat maps of countries and risk areas. We like to tell clients to look at the world more about a micro level. A lot of the products and solutions out there paint with a too broad of a stroke, and sometimes you know, they color an entire country as red when in reality perhaps there's only certain regions that are hotspots and should be avoided. Mexico, as an example, the majority of the violence is you could say historically has been in the northern area of the country along the border with the United States, but unfortunately with that perspective of very macro, the situations are very dynamic, the crime trends are very dynamic, and the risks are very dynamic. So what was once a hotspot, you know, a month ago or a couple of weeks ago may not be the case currently, depending on government actions and whether, for example, they're chasing a certain cartel member, or whether there was an apprehension or they found somebody. That's just one example of how that's going to play into that heat mapping. Joe, if you're still there, do you want to touch upon the SMI?
Absolutely. One area that will, as far as self-promotion as it relates to that, is AFIMAC has recently launched our social media investigations, and that was really designed to help in this area that we were covering today, so that individuals and or organizations can take a look at what activities out there as far as social media. And it's really broken down into 3 areas: a social media footprint, which would give you just an idea of any activity for an individual and or a group, and gives you an idea of their activity and their frequency of use as far as social media is concerned. That's a 24-hour period that can be looked at to determine if in fact there's something of value there or something that needs to be looked at further, which could lead into a social media surveillance, which is basically an extension of that footprint, but it's a look at that activity over a 30-day period as well. So you can get a longer look at social media activity, be able to make some decisions based upon that, or get the required information that you're looking for over a 30-day period. If in fact it turns into where you want a physical surveillance done, we can also assist with that. But the idea is that we want to provide opportunities and the availability for organizations to be able to do something before they have to commit to a physical surveillance, and therefore the social media footprint and social media surveillance was designed. We'd be glad to give you more information on that. If you want to request it, just please let us know and we'll follow up with you. Again, Adrian and my contact information are located on this slide here. Please, you can reach out to us at any of those email addresses and or through our website and or the phone number that's listed there. We would like to thank everybody for attending the webinar, and if we have questions, we do have some time available here to answer any questions that you may have.
Yeah, I'll also mention for everybody listening, because there were a couple questions whether the webinar would be recorded or available for later use. I believe we will be hosting this webinar, or I should say preparing and uploading the recording onto our YouTube channel. So what we can do is once that is completed, put out an email to all attendees with a link where you can reference the webinar on your own. There was a question here from a person, and the question was, which monitoring tools do you recommend? We can help prepare a listing of monitoring tools that we see our clients and we recommend our clients utilize. Many of those tools, as Joe mentioned, are our own product. However, there's really widespread capabilities and functionalities within the market, so it would take a little bit of a discussion in terms of identifying that scope or the objective for which part you're trying to mitigate in order to identify such a tool. There really is, as everything in security, there's no company that does all things in all places, and what you're going to find in social media, the tools are very specific. They're scalpels, if you will. So you're going to have to identify exactly what you're trying to do or what you're trying to get out of the tool in order to basically narrow down that listing.
Yeah, and there are a tremendous amount of those tools that are out there, and how you use them and how that information can be put together and disseminated is extremely important. But you have things like geosocial footprint, EchoSec, TweetPath, Iconosquare, Twitonomy, quite honestly, is another one. But there are a number of different ones out there, and quite honestly, more than you could probably comprehend at one sitting. So as Adrian said, it's best to understand exactly kind of what the scope is and what you're looking for, and we'd be glad to help tailor that look or the utilization of those tools, whether there are tools or another resources, tools to help you get the end product that you're looking for.
Let me also clarify, because I think my previous statement was a little ambiguous. You know, if you take our own products which are available, we have a product for geofencing and geotagging. We have a product for social media investigative capabilities. So what you're going to find is, you know, depending on what you want to do in the social media space, there is a tool that is specifically created that has special algorithms or a special engine, if you will, that's going to get you that information that you're looking for.
And it's helpful to understand exactly how much information and to what level that tool will drill down to and really realistically give you in return.
Yeah, I don't see any other questions on the webinar, but please feel free, if something comes up maybe later today or a week from now, feel free to send an email, and we will do our best to help answer that question for you.
All right, we thank everybody for joining us, and as Adrian said, any questions that come up, please feel free to reach out. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.